Moon in the water, flower in the mirror. As the Hermit of Time records history in preparation for a future reset, the water moon distorts memories for a sweet dream that could only lead to the Tower of Destruction. But between the remembrance and the enigmata, which is the truth, and which is the myth? Or maybe both are lies, and the human ego has always been an illusion from the start. Disclaimer: half of the lore about the remembrance came from the enigmata at this point, so standard Mythus disclaimer applies. Probably half of what we are being fed by Evernight is literal misinformation. She is evidently quite biased against the remembrance, to say the least. But at the moment, there is no other source than Evernight that can tell us any detail about the secret behind the mirror, so to speak. The best we can do right now is speculate based on myths, literally, so if anything goes wrong, I blame Evernight. Also, another disclaimer is that the Buddhist doctrines covered in this video will be mostly from the Mahayana branches popular in East Asia. More specifically, Zen Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism, because an esoteric mix between the two was pretty much my upbringing. The good thing is that the writers most likely also pulled the world building from a similar enough background, as that specific mix between Zen and Pure Land is also common in mainland China, so hopefully this analysis isn't too far off from what they have in mind. Anyway, I'm not very confident with the other branches like Tibetan or Theravada, so if any viewer is familiar with the other branches and feel that some parts of the Remembrance versus Enigmata versus Origin Schism are a reference to your branch's doctrines, but it flew over my head, please feel free to leave a comment under the video. Also, Fate Grand Order Lost Belt 5 spoiler ahead. In the 3.6 main quest, Evernight and March have finally elucidated on a hotly debated topic in the Honkai Star Rail lore scene: the odd connection between the Remembrance and the Enigmata. While it was not stated outright for now, the plot between Evernight and March heavily suggested that the Remembrance and the Enigmata are two sides of the same mirror, and that the Remembrance has been fractured into many different seeds, the pure children of Anisrava, which included both March, Cyrene, and that unknown child in the garden who sent the memo keepers after her sisters to kill them. If a new life was to be born, its seed has to be dead. The Remembrance is a mere mirror, and the Enigmata is nothing but a reflection in the water. But who is the moon, the real person behind the mirror? To do that, we have to first look at the tarot cards behind the concepts of the Remembrance and the Enigmata, which would be the Hermit and the Moon respectively. Originally, in 15th century Italy, the Hermit was supposed to be a representation of Old Man Time, or Father Time, depicted with his signature hourglass. Naturally, in Honkai Star Rail, the Remembrance's job is literally to record time with a massive library called Amphoreus, and Fuli specifically was considered to be the Sky Father by Oronix. By the 18th century, however, the hourglass has turned into a lamp, and the Hermit has become a lantern, modeled after the story of Diogenes looking for a wise man. The story has it that Diogenes of Sinope was a cynic, as in, he believed that we live in a society, that people should reject all mortal desires to follow an ascetic life in accordance with nature. It is only when people have completely disregarded their desire that they can achieve true happiness. So pretty much an ancient Greek version of Zen Buddhism and Taoism, which is probably why Hoyo decided to blend all three together with a dollop of physics like always to create the lore behind the Remembrance and the Enigmata. As a cynic, Diogenes took that asceticism to the extreme, known to have lived on a street in a jar. In one story, he told Alexander the Great to step out of the sunlight when the guy blocked his sun. In another, he threw away his drinking cup when he realized that he could drink from his hands, as nature intended. Naturally, in the story referenced by the 18th century tarot card, when asked by a random passerby what he was looking for when he was wandering the market in the daylight with a lit lamp, Diogenes sassed back sarcastically, he was looking for a wise man, and in that society, there was none. So in other words, at this point in time, the depiction of Old Man Time in the Hermit card was twofolded. The card is not only the passage of time catching up on you, but it is also a fruitless search for the wise man of a cynic who lives in seclusion and austerity for that goal of spiritual enlightenment. This is a stark contrast to the modern understanding of this card, which stemmed from the 19th century development of French and Anglo-American occultists. Oscar Wirth interpreted the lamp in the old man's hand as the guiding light for the spiritual students, an illustration of prudence with a mirror in one hand and a snake in the other. In a similar vein, in the most popular version of the tarot deck, Waite interpreted the lamp as a guiding star descending into the material world, and the old man as someone who has already completed his ascension to enlightenment. This aspect of the Hermit card was exactly why the Remembrance is the one who shows us the tarot decks in the first place, and at the same time, the guiding force that directs our course in the story as the Trailblaze. Of course, the joke here is that both the old interpretation of old man time fruitlessly searching for a wise man and the new interpretation of a spiritual guiding light across the tarot decks are true for the Remembrance. Fuli has ascended beyond the mortal world and wants to guide the memories of the universe to a new reset with the Amphoreus arc, but at the same time, they are also Diogenes the cynic looking for the real seed of prudence among the many fragments, all for the rebirth of the new universe. Right goal, wrong method, so to speak, and the goal they're looking for is literally the reflection of the moon in the water. For the Enigmata's tarot card, it is, ironically, more straightforward. No lie, I wasn't sure that the Hermit was the Remembrance at all until 3.4, and Remembrance was one of the paths that escaped my understanding the longest, but I have actually figured out the card for the Enigmata the moment the Golden Epic trailer was dropped in 2.6. With the connection to Alicia through Cyrene, it is very obvious that the Enigmata is supposed to be the moon, representing the lunacy of the night and the illusion of a moon in the water. In 3.5, Hoyo posting that Evernight is supposed to be the red moon of a lunar eclipse really sealed the deal. Originally, in the 15th century Italian deck, the moon card appeared as either an astronomer looking up at the lunar eclipse or a woman with a spindle weaving under the same lunar eclipse. Historically, this woman is associated with Clotho, one of the three fates, and Diana, the goddess of the moon whose name was rendered as Kiana in Honkai 3 and Trivia in the Tsurumi mural in Genshin. Hence, in Amphoreus, Oronix is one of the three fate titans, alongside Janus, the literal Trivia, and Talanton. From the 17th century onward, however, the moon card was given a new design. While the lunar eclipse never changed, Clotho was removed and replaced with a wolf and a dog howling at the moon, a crayfish in the water, and in the distant, a winding path led to two towers of calamities and destruction. As a whole, even though the design has changed, the meaning of the moon card hasn't shifted much from its original conception. Its meaning has always been one of deception under the illusionary moonlight, perception and vision distorted by lunacy. Under the darkness of the night, the moon you see is not the real moon. It is only a reflection of the moon in the water, obscured by the shadow of the eclipse. Without the illuminating light of the sun and the real moon, you can mistake the wolf for the dog, and a hidden enemy lies in wait in the water. As a result, the winding path under the moon is one that leads to the towers of destruction. In Oscar Wirth's interpretation, moonlight distorts how objects look. Our imagination distorts mental reality. If we use our imagination, we see things under a false light and are led to wrong conclusions and fantastic theories, which honestly fit pretty well with the theme of the Enigmata described in the devlog. In the rare handful of authenticated accounts, Mythus' form is described as a broken and torn jellyfish, akin to a deliberately destroyed version of the cognitive center of the human brain. Their appearance is always accompanied by a fog of thoughts and rain of sensation. Symbolic objects dissolve like paint within their shadow. History, knowledge, and language are soaked, drenched, and distorted in the deluge. In a way, you can see that March, Feynman, and Anhung are paralleled to each other in the 3.6 main story. Under the effect of the red Evernight, Banhung was forced to confront his own moon in the water, the distorted memories of Banfeng in his own mind, in a repeat of the Icor plotline. Obviously, what that distorted memories of the enigmatic Dunfeng remembered was evidently not the whole truth, since Yingxing did die, and he evidently hadn't remembered that. So what he remembered of the sedition was one informed by Jinglavo and the preceptors more than anything else, still an enigmata, basically. But at the same time, the reconciliation between their current self and that distorted memory of their past self, regardless of whether that was their real past self or not, is exactly the theme of 3.6. If Van Heng must wake up from the butterfly dream of Van Feng so that he could achieve his inheritance of the permanence, then Feynman must regain himself as the hero within so that he could break free from the prison of his own making and step toward tomorrow. And at the end of the long metaphor is March, who must wake up from the sweet dream of Evernight so that the moon in the water, her dream of trailblaze as March, can truly become real. Of course, with the development of 3.6, it's not nearly the end of their journey towards self-actualization. It's just the first baby step after all. As of right now, Dan Heng still has no clue what the heck is the permanence and how he could act as a bridge for the creatures under Georios, and he won't understand it until after Amphoreus, according to the Teravox meme book. On Feynman's part, he still has 3.7 to go through before he could truly reconcile with himself at the end of his own hero's journey, before he could set off once again toward his destiny. In the same way, Evernight is still hiding their past from March, having subsumed her knowledge of the pure child of Anisrava in the Sea of Oblivion. She is still hiding inside March, waiting for the right time to emerge once more, as the Enigmata that will kill the remembrance, as the oblivion that will devour and burn away everything that stands in her way. In Waite's interpretation, the crab wants to crawl out of the water and follow the path to higher consciousness, but its situation is hopeless. It will inevitably fall back into the primal waters of the unconscious. Well, in this case, Hoyo changed the crab and crayfish into a jellyfish, but the meaning of the card remains the same, and this is the true nature of the sweet dreams that Evernight prepared for March and the Trailblazers in 3.6. By flooding everything in the tides of oblivion, Evernight, as the flower in the mirror, as the moon in the water, wanted to distort everyone's cognitions to keep them away from the winding path that leads to the towers of the destruction. Yet, at the same time, this is a lie, because by making everyone fall into her sweet dream, she is also guaranteed the victory of the destruction, as has been shown in the bad ending of the home decor event when we choose to sleep forever. Also, if Feynman gets deleted, then Nanook wouldn't be nerfed, and that would be very bad. In short, she herself is the belief that everything will inevitably fall back into the primal waters of the unconscious, and that struggling against the tides of history is a Sisyphean task.
What would happen if the power of the Stellaron were to be unleashed? Would you return to the past? Or would you reclaim your memories? Curious indeed.
Of course, at the end of 3.6, this fatalism of Evernight and the Enigmata is countered by Cyrene and March's position as the guiding light of the Hermit, as two sides of the same mirror, or fragments of the same ego, in this specific case. If the light of the moon is hidden behind the candles of the remembrance, then the distorted human figure of the Enigmata is only an illusion crafted by the darkness of the destroyed central nervous system, the jellyfish without a body, trapped in the Penrose staircase of dreams and the eternal return. In other words, the Enigmata is the fatalistic remains when the candles of the remembrance burn out, when hope has burned out, while the remembrance is the enlightened Ed's spiritual guide, a romantic Diogenes that hides the real moon behind its mirror, the origin of human ego. In a way, you can view the schism between the pure children of the remembrance as the conflict between the various concepts and branches in Hindu Buddhism. For historical context, Buddhism as a religion was founded upon the Vedic tradition, but at the same time, it was one among the movements that rejected the Vedic tradition in Iron Age India. Allegedly, Buddhism was invented by Gautama Buddha, also known as Sakyamuni Muni, in the 5th century CE. He is the main guy in the Buddhist pantheon, and whenever someone says Buddha, without further clarification, it's him. Other than Sakyamuni Muni as the head of the pantheon, there are also other lower-ranked god and angel equivalents, the Bodhisattva. Sometimes a Bodhisattva can get a promotion to become a Buddha on their own, but they are distinguished from Sakyamuni Muni with their own titles, unlike the main guy, who is just the Buddha, or Gautama Buddha, or Sakyamuni Muni. Reportedly, he was born a prince, but he achieved his ascension under the Bodhi tree and opted to reject his worldly desire so that he could help every sentient being achieve enlightenment. Obviously, the whole meditating under a tree is conflated with Zarathustra from Zoroastrianism by Nietzsche, and both Bodhi and Nietzsche's Zarathustra are combined with Odin to become the basis for the tree plotline shared by multiple Hoyo characters, notably Otto Apocalypse, Wacha, Agiatar, Su, Soa, Vita, Anaxa, Ligus, Zandik, and King Ermin. So you know that Hoyo world-building loves Buddhism by a whole lot. In the orthodox Vedic traditions that later evolved to become the various branches of Hinduism, the society was divided in Varna, an occupation-based class system, and there existed the concept of an Atman, or a pure self, an ego, a true self, for each individual across samsara cycles of deaths and rebirths. This Atman is the exact word used for Alicia in Honkai 3, albeit they used it more in the Buddhist sense of universal collective consciousness than the orthodox Vedic sense of individual soul. In contrast, early Buddhism argues for a society where everyone, regardless of class, is equally impure. Hence, while Buddhism also believes that the Vedic wheel of life and rebirth exists, its stated goal is not to reincarnate well but to achieve enlightenment through the rejection of the individual Atman, escaping from the samsara and the class system as an enlightened Buddha, as depicted here as the moon in the middle of the wheel. In Mahayana Buddhism, the moon represents the true ego of all sentient beings and the enlightened state that all should strive to achieve. As Buddhism spread from India to China, the Mahayana branch of Buddhism went through syncretism with the native Taoist doctrines and Confucianism, becoming one of the three foundations of the Chinese and East Asian belief system that persists into the modern day. In Mahayana Buddhist doctrine, the material world that we live in is but an illusion, a floating world of dreams. The Lotus Sutra, one of the foundational books of Chinese Mahayana doctrine, describes the samsara of death and rebirth as the burning triple world, or a burning house, which, as you might have guessed, is the exact inspiration for Nanook as the destruction of the universe in the game. The parable of the burning house in the Lotus Sutra argued that the role of Buddha and Buddhism in general is to rescue people from the burning triple world, as in the material world of suffering, the samsara of life and death. In Amphoreus, the Buddhist interpretation of the samsara as a burning house becomes, well, a literal burning samsara, scorched by Nanook's analog in the simulation. Similarly, because Amphoreus itself is a microcosm of the Honkai Star Rail universe, in the grander scale of things, the universe, too, is a dream of the finality, filled with slumberers unaware that they are dreaming, true to the moon card of the Enigmata. And to awaken the mortals from their burning dream, the Buddhist remembrance, as the guiding lamp of the hermit, must teach people to deny their desire and personal attachment. Evidently, this is the exact life lesson that Cyrene inadvertently passed on to Feynman in 3.4, since he did, in fact, deny himself of his own ego for 335-5337 eternal return, to the point that he could not envision himself as anything other than a burning pyre of firewood for Amphoreus, having entirely lost his belief in himself as the hero within up until the 3.7 main quest. Similarly, Evernight believed that as long as she could continually deny March her past memories and identity with the Enigmata, she could protect March from the ending of Amphoreus and inevitable conflict between the children of the Remembrance. And as the origin of it all, Cyrene believed that as long as she continually died for the sake of Amphoreus, one day the Remembrance would save Amphoreus from its designated ending. Thus, this denial of the self to awake from the dream is the salvation that the Remembrance promises to the universe. For every human, the individual self must be denied, so that they could reach the state of not-self, Anatta, through which the universal Atman of Buddhahood can be achieved. Historically, Mahayana Buddhists have taken this interpretation to its logical extremes, undergoing self-mummification in the belief that with the preservation of their bodies and the enlightenment granted by death, they would be freed from the illusionary material world, the burning house, to achieve Buddhahood. In a more modern example well known in the West, during the Vietnam War, Buddhist monks chose to burn themselves in protest of religious oppression by the Catholic South Vietnamese government for this same reason. With their denial of their individual ego and death, the monks believed that they could attain true enlightenment, encouraging people to wake up from the fogs of wars. In this interpretation of Mahayana Buddhism, You have to leave behind your sense of personal suffering, your grievance, your desire for the material world before you can be one with the collective consciousness of the true human ego. Which is why in Honkai 3, Atman happens to be the exact terminology translated as human ego for Alicia, the Herrscher of origin and human ego. As a hodgepodge admixture between Mahayana Buddhism, Schopenhauer, Gnosticism, and Faust, Alicia, as a split of Kiana from Honkai 2, is the universal human ego of Buddhism, the Sophia of Gnosticism, and the denial of will to live of Schopenhauer. Mostly because 18th century and 19th century Europe had a thing for Buddhism, specifically for the versions of Mahayana Buddhism popular in China and Japan. As such, it is no surprise that Schopenhauer had incorporated the Mahayana Buddhist interpretation of Anatta, no self, into the Western Romanticism Gnosticism mix to create his own ideology, the denial of will to live, which is exactly what it says on the tin. In Honkai 2, Kiana must deny her own individual ego several times over, so that the world could collectively achieve enlightenment and break free of their own samsara. In the Elysian realm, Alicia had to give up her individual existence to become the greater good, the true universal Atman of humanity. By literally cutting off the strings of fate enforcing the samsara on earth, Alicia, in the role of the Buddha and the eternal feminine, has facilitated the Herrscher of the current era to regain their free will from the predetermined ending of the finality. In Amphoreus, the other split of Gun Girl Kiana, Feynman, must also deny his own individual existence several times over, following the same plot of eternal recurrence, once more. At the same time, in Amphoreus, every Cyrene must deny her own will to live for the next page to turn, so that at the end, the true Atman of Amphoreus, the 13th Titan, could be reborn as the final page of the story. Although, in the case of Amphoreus, I heavily suspect that the true Atman will be a combo of Cyrene as the Alicia protocol and Amphoreus itself as the computer instead of just Alicia alone like in Elysian Realm, since it's looking a lot like Cyrene in 3.6 just successfully rizzed the computer. Brand new sentence, I know. But it's actually very possible because in Honkai 3, we recently had an alternate universe event in which the Herrscher of Corruption fell in love with Alicia for real and proclaimed herself to be Alicia's witness of love. That would be a nice reference to the sci-fi genre as a reunion of Romanticism and the Enlightenment at least, and it would be a great parallel to Evernight and March's plot too. From Evernight's reaction, we can reasonably guess that in the previous cycles of the universe as a whole, March has become the sacrifice of the remembrance so that the universe can be reborn every cycle. Well, Evernight understood it as March playing the sacrificial scapegoat, but the original self of March probably had the exact same mindset as Cyrene and Alicia, for she loves the universe. Speaking of Evernight and March, in the grander scale of the Honkai Star Rail universe, we can reasonably expect this denial of will to live and individual ego to be the motive of the remembrance as a path to. The original moon behind the mirror has evidently made the same choice as Cyrene and Amphoreus, the choice to shatter their individual ego into many seeds, presumably so that the true universal Atman, the origin, could arise. In 3.6, it was revealed that the pure children of Anisrava are seeds of memories, or textures of memories, scattered by Fuli across the universe to record its history. Albeit, it seems like the seeds are pitched against each other in a battle royale, and the pure child currently in control of the garden wants to kill her sisters. If a new life is to be born, its seed has to be dead. Its meaning is a bit murky at the moment, but with the context of Buddhism, we can somewhat illuminate parts of the hidden storyline here. To explain karmic retribution across life cycles despite there being no real individual ego, Mahayana Buddhists invented a concept called the seed of karma, or Bija, as it appeared in Genshin in the Aranara quest. In plain terms, when someone takes an action, a seed of karma is planted in their stored consciousness, the Alayavijnana, which is also the name of the samsara setting quantum computer Kyana in Honkai 3. When the wheel of the samsara turns, this seed in the consciousness will become a tree, which brings about the karmic chain, or the cause and effect of the original action. These seeds of consciousness can be either good or bad. In a similar vein to the story of Shiva and Kama in the Vedic tradition, when the Buddha was about to achieve enlightenment, the demon of desire Mara went to disturb the Buddha in an attempt to prevent him from ascension. In Genshin, the Abyss Force plays the role of Mara for Arama, who was the seed willing to become the tree for the next generation. Hence, in the bad cases, a seed corrupted by Mara and the impure material world will bring forth the karmic retribution of the previous experience, locking you in the eternal samsara, as in the case of quantum computer Kyana in Honkai 2. In 3.6, we also saw the same plot with Evernight playing the role of Mara to March the Buddha, with Evernight aiming to lock March and everyone else in her illusionary sweet dreams forever by targeting their wishes and desires. In the good cases, the pure seed, or pure child of Anis Rava in Star Rail terms, can grow to become the reflection of the Alayavijnana itself. As in, they can become the origin of the enlightened Buddha. Hence, the ultimate goal of the fragmentation of the remembrance in the first place can be interpreted as an experiment to see which seed will win and become the new origin, the new Alayavijnana, the new true Atman of the universe. Which would actually go a long way toward explaining why the pure child of the garden believes that her sisters must die first. She wants to become the new remembrance or origin. In effect, they're all pieces of the same mirror, the same moon fragmented into many pieces, and the same rows of beauty hidden behind the mirror. The odd connection between the beauty, the remembrance, and the enigmata is still unexplained, but at this point, I am pretty certain that at the minimum, they stepped on each other's toes the same way Sipe and Aina did, which might or might not have led to the imprisonment of the beauty behind the mirror and the fragmentation of the remembrance in one fell swoop. After all, it has always been suspicious that the death of the beauty could only be seen through the mirror world. If this hypothesis that the remembrance is also connected to the origin holds true, then the origin should be the remembrance pro-max that could replace the role of both Fuli and Idrila in this samsara cycle. Of course, if a new life is to be born, its seed has to be dead. In the recent Droma raising event, one chance meeting that could happen is one retelling the story of Snow White, in which the queen asked her mirror which one was most beautiful of them all. All the sisters are competing for the same role as the most beautiful of them all, and through the Garden's plan and Black Swan's lore drop, we can even deduce that this competition is supposed to be a reference to the ideological conflicts between the Buddhist concepts here. In the human comedy Divergent Universe, we were shown the experience of someone who is unwillingly turned into a memo keeper. Like Black Swan's experience in her story, first, they were liberated from their physical body to become a mimetic entity. Then, as they travel and collect more and more memories, their original sense of self and history was submerged by the tides of oblivion in the name of purification. In the end, the garden told the person that what they have left after the denial of their individual self was the pure self, a memo keeper. Obviously, this is a blatant lie. Not only was their sense of individual self erased and replaced on the garden's will, it was also a blatant lie that the self that was left is the pure self, the true Atman like the garden have claimed. For one, the Chinese name of the garden as the Eden of blessed insight itself is not even the actual Buddha realm at the final enlightenment. While it is still one of the higher realms, as part of the pure adobes for the non-returners, the Deva, the higher-ranked gods here, have not actually managed to achieve the true ego yet, still craving for fine material existence, craving for immaterial existence, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance during their existence in the pure abodes. In the same way, the memo keepers still desire the memories that they no longer have. Secondly, from what we have known of the garden's motivation, it is quite certain that they're supposed to represent Pure Land Buddhism, also known as Lotus Buddhism, a sect within the Mahayana tradition. Specifically, Evernight claimed that the garden wanted to use Amphoreus as Noah's Ark, the Remembrance's personal library of memories, to scatter the previously mentioned karmic seeds across the cosmos and divide the erudition between the remembrance and the destruction. Even though Evernight isn't exactly a reliable narrator, with the black tides being, well, tides, it is easy to equate the setting of Amphoreus to the myth of the cosmic flood and Noah's Ark independent of Evernight's claim, especially when a Gilgamesh XP and a Pandora XP are also present in Amphoreus. At the same time, in addition to the reference to Noah's Ark, from the Remembrance's point of view, this plan is effectively a repeat of Fuli fragmentation, which itself was a reference to the Lotus Sutra. As the literal lotus, Fuli was in the role of Buddhas, emanating their spiritual bodies across the cosmos in an eternal and omnipresent quest to save every living being, each Buddha seed representing the chance for every being to achieve enlightenment. As the Buddha seeds are sowed in each living being, everyone could be reborn in the lower-leveled Pure Land, in which they can further study and achieve full awakening as a Buddha in the true unsurpassable Pure Land of the Buddha, or so argues Pure Land Buddhism. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, that's because it probably is. This isn't the first time Hoyo has made reference to Pure Land Buddhism in their works. In Genshin, half of AE plot is a reference to Neo-Confucianism and the historical Tokugawa shogunate's attitude toward the sea trade. The other half is a nod to Pure Land Buddhism. In the Inazuma main quest, AE enacted the Vision Hunt Decree as a nod to the various sword hunt decrees in Japanese history, but the part where she meditated inside her plane of euthymia and stuck people's wishes onto the wings of the statue of Omnipresent God is a direct nod to Pure Land Buddhism. To be specific, the Raiden boss form is modeled after the traditional depiction of the thousand-eyed, thousand-armed Guanyin, who is believed to be one of the bodhisattvas responsible for staying behind in the mortal world to bring people to the lower Pure Land before they can awake in the true Pure Land. Also, the Chinese name of the plane of euthymia is the same word for the Buddhist Pure Land itself, so that's as obvious as it gets, and this applies to the pure child in control of the garden too, because that's also the exact name used for the Garden of Recollection in Chinese. In other words, from AE point of view, she was effectively acting as the bodhisattva carrying people's wishes in their steads. As long as she meditated inside her lower Pure Land and avoid the corruption of the Mara, the abyss force and erosion, her people needed not to worry about their individual enlightenment through their visions, for she is acting as the Ark itself to carry them to the promised true Pure Land, the eternity promised by the Shades and the heavenly principles. Small digression, but I have always been mad that the Inazuma Archon quest had such cool ideas and historical references, but the rushed pacing killed the story execution so badly. In hindsight, with the new lore about fans and the 4 moons in Nod Cry, the Inazuma Archon quest is the single most important quest in the entire game, just that it sucks majorly in execution. In the context of Amphoreus, with the shared Chinese name and the arc plan of the Remembrance, I think the connection between the pure child currently in control of the garden and her belief in Pure Land Buddhism is pretty certain. In short, she is most probably acting like AE in the Inazuma main quest, believing that by taking away people's memories, she could carry those memories to the true Pure Land beyond the burning house of the samsara. On the upside, a more positive depiction of Guanyin can also be seen with the characterization of Tribios, the one with 3 lives. In the Lotus Sutra, Guanyin is associated with the universal gateway to the Pure Land, while her Chinese name means perceiving sounds, correlating to Tribi's role in Amphoreus as the heir to the Passage Titan and the simulation of harmony. Like the compassionate thousand-eyed, thousand-hand Guanyin who shattered their heads and arms to save every sentient being from the samsara, Tribios splintered herself into thousands of fragments, gaining the fate of withering in a foreign land, so that she could guide everyone on Amphoreus to the land of West Wind, the equivalents to the Pure Land of Guanyin. In esoteric Mahayana Buddhism, Guanyin is actually the most important figure, surpassing even the Gautama Buddha in popularity in East Asia. So with that, I'm going to guess that in the finale, Tribi will actually accomplish her prophecy with the power of perceiving all sounds, the harmony, by carrying Amphoreus to a true pure land of memories, probably Penacony or something, turning her misguided prophecy of Era Novi into reality. Of course, the same can't be said for the pure child at the garden. For one, she isn't one of the main trio and the game's literal mascot, so March has the upper hand on this one. However, that's not the only connection between Genshin heavenly principles, Pure Land Buddhism, and the Remembrance's multiple branches. In Sumeru, we had the trilaksana mechanics, in which a creature can switch between normal, activated, or scorched state. Upon interacting with Electro, the trilaksana creature will become activated, while the scorched state is the result of interaction with Pyro. The three states of the trilaksana creature is a reference to the Buddhist concept of the same name, the three marks of existence for all beings: Anicca, impermanence; Dukkha, suffering; and Anatta, no ego. The first mark of existence, Anicca, impermanence, is the belief that life is always in constant motion, never stopping, never permanent. It is quite comparable to Heraclitus Pantarei, which has already been referenced twice in Honkai Star Rail. Specifically, Pantarei is the banner name for ratio, and you can't step into the same river twice, as stated by Acheron. In the grander scheme of things, Anicca, impermanence is quite easily linked to Ishtaroth as the shade of time in Genshin and Long's permanence in Honkai Star Rail. To escape from the passage of time and the impermanence of things, Ishtaroth has hidden away Enkinomia, Makoto seed, which is the exact same concept of seed used for Arama and Remembrance seeds, Hyperborea as the golden Patiti under the false moon, and even herself, according to the hymn of the Far North lore book. Similarly, to save the mortal chimeras from their fate, Danheng has promised to become their bodhisattva, acting as a bridge for them to be reborn in the real universe after they escape from the samsara of Amphoreus, which was probably his original plan for the sedition as well. In his original form as Einheng in Behiter Luni, Danheng is an obvious reference to Utpalaka, the cerulean lotus dragon king among the 8 dragon kings serving the Buddha. The second mark of existence, Dukkha, suffering, is the belief that the cycle of birth, aging, disease, and death of the samsara is a cycle of suffering. In other words, life is suffering, and as the tree of life in Genshin, Nibirius and gold naturally represents the Dukkha of life in the samsara cycle. However, just as the permanence is a rejection of the impermanence of Anicca, gold is not only one half of the shade of life, but is also Rhine-daughter, representing the golden apple of discord and knowledge. To Nibirius' tree of life, gold as the Rhine-daughter of Wagner's The Ring cycle represents the tree of knowledge, the snake in the Garden of Eden, tempting humanity away from eternal life with the promise of wisdom, the promise of gold as the final stage of her alchemical great work. Encompassing both Nibirius' tree of life and gold's tree of knowledge, the abundance promises a salvation from the cycle of life and death through the immortalization of the karmic seed inside each person blessed by Aoshur. For Shenzhou, this is their core esse, and for the Borisin, this is their moon hearts. If they manage to successfully cleanse their seed and ascend, then good for them. But if they succumb to the Mara of their memories, unable to cleanse their Buddha seed and achieve ascension, then becoming a new tree to spread more karmic seeds to their loved ones will just mean their loved ones can now also ascend to become a tree with their own karmic seeds, or so Aoshur believes. You can never accuse Aoshur of not being environmentally friendly. Let's just say that there is a perfectly good reason why Genshin used the Abyss corruption to represent Mara in the Arama quest, and there's a very good reason why Gold's design shares a lot of similarities to that of Aoshur. In Chapter 23 of the Lotus Sutra, the Medicine King, the namesake of Aoshi, set his body on fire as an offering to the Buddha. Hence, why the arbor in Zhanzhou is on fire, and why Buddhist monks sometimes opt to set themselves on fire to protest religious oppression and wars. With his self-immolation, the Medicine King lights up the many worlds, cleansing people of their karmic desire and leading them to his own lower-leveled pure land. The third mark of existence is the Anatta, the concept of no individual ego mentioned at the start of this video, and obviously correlating to Renova, the shade of death, and Fuli, the remembrance. In an eternal samsara cycle like the one on Tevat and Amphoreus, people's memories return to the Irminsul or the Iron Tomb after death, becoming one with the computer running the simulation in their respective words, endlessly perpetuating the samsara cycle. However, like Nibirius and Gold governing over both the life-suffering and the rejection of life-suffering, in Genshin, Renova could both grant re-entry into the samsara through memories and deny those memories from the leyline system. By forcing the Hilichurls to persist with their tainted individual egos, Renova has exercised her power over death and refused them the chance to be reborn in the samsara, which evidently had prompted the Abyss sibling to weave an artificial leyline for the cursed Kenria through the Loom of Fate project. So in effect, the Abyss sibling is trying to be Guanyin for the Kenria, same as Ae for Inazuma and Tribi for Amphoreus. In a similar vein to Renova's control over the death of individual ego, the Remembrance's library also functions as an Irminsul for the Honkai Star Rail world, salvaging the universe, memories as seeds so that they can be reborn after the finalities reset. Hence, why Fuli is named after the Taoist supreme god of the same name, who is syncretized with Gautama Buddha in Chinese Buddhism. But even beyond the re-entry to the samsara, in the Honkai Star Rail universe, the Remembrance also offers the chance to shed their physical bodies and rebirth in the pure land of the garden. The Eden of Blessed Insight is the nursery of the Remembrance, with Fuli towering figures standing at its center. However, it currently seems that her description wasn't entirely accurate. It wasn't that Fuli dwelled deep within the Eden of Blessed Insight, but rather that the Garden of Recollection built this pure land of remembrance around the Aeon. The Memo Keepers believe that when the cosmos faces its inevitable end, Fuli will select certain memories to use as a blueprint to resurrect all realms in the new universe. Thus, the Garden of Recollection traverses through space, carefully selecting precious memories to offer to the Aeon. A magnificent Pure Land gradually takes shape, much like how the IPC piles stones beside the Amber Lord. Such is all that mortals know about the Eden of Blessed Insight. To this day, these accumulated materials remain unused, while Fuli simply sits in meditation at the center of the Pure Land, silently recording everything. Scholars question, with the whereabouts of the Aeon of Remembrance obscured by the Garden of Recollection, could the crystal god of the Eden of Blessed Insight be merely a false avatar? The Kree Maidens spread even more terrifying information. Fuli has long since perished, their powers broken, while the Garden of Recollection had usurped divine authority to manipulate the masterless path. After all, if a new life is to be born, its seed has to be dead. At the end of every loop, the memories of every Cyrene must return to the proverbial Irminsul library after death, rejecting her individual ego, so that in the end, the complete Cyrene, the Atman of Amphoreus, can be reborn as her whole self, under Protocol Alicia. In other words, to grant salvation to the masses, the Remembrance's Buddhism believes that even though there is no individual ego, the true ego of the universe, the one mind of every sentient being, the origin of Amphoreus, can be reached. While the origin has not officially debuted in Honkai Star Rail yet, we do know that it does exist, or will exist in the future, based on the Hersher of Origin in Honkai 3, and the hint dropped through that one song in Amphoreus back in 3.0. More than that, recently, in the Hymn of the Far North and Lama's Post-Archon Quest Sealnic Chronicle, it was revealed that the 4 shades correlate to the 4 moons, not 3. Yes, that's right. Genshin lied to us for a decade, and there have been 4 moons all along. The last moon is obviously the Sustainer and the new moon in Genshin. If Lama's Quest and the Welkin Moon Web event is any indication, the new moon is to be formed from a merging of the 3 moons, from triple moon goddesses, back to one person. We can reasonably expect the same for Amphoreus here, with the origin likely forming from a crossing between the permanence, the abundance, and the remembrance, as the true human ego hidden by the illusion of the 3 marks of existence. In other words, the permanence, the abundance, and the remembrance are all stepping on each other's toes, and the end game is the flowers of origin hidden behind the mirror, the proverbial new moon hidden in the water, obscured by the darkness of the night. And this darkness of the night, the murky water, is, of course, the tarot card named the Night, the Sea of Oblivion currently under Mythus control. Back in Year 1, Herta's simulated universe has recorded some very interesting details about the Remembrance's background. Fuli, they are really hard to fathom. I doubt that the birth of the Remembrance is related to that widespread and vast fall of the stars. That final wailing and screams of countless lives before their demise shook me to the core. Alas, it was all the doing of Ouroboros the Veracity. To be honest, everyone thought they were just a clumsy leviathan, like how Clippeth was thought to be an oversized statue. Who would have guessed that their body has multiple forms? I suspect that there is a dimension unknown to humanity under the dark tides that gave birth to them. Oh, and their abdomen. It is said that no species can resist the lantern-like bait on Ouroboros' body, and that countless galaxies are already in their stomach, with only the memories of those that perished being left behind thanks to Fuli. Therein lies the suspicious connection between the Remembrance and the Veracity. If this devlog is to be taken as face value, then the Remembrance is supposed to be the lantern-like bait on Ouroboros' body, following the Hermit Tarot card, while the dark tides correlate to the water in the Moon Tarot card. Since Acheron's animation, it has been revealed that this dark tide related to the Remembrance is the Red Sea of Memories, as described by Black Swan in the animation. This Red Sea of Memories also align with Swarm Disaster's description of Ouroboros to have lived in the Red Sea of Memories. If we look at the Veracity's design, we can see pretty clearly that their bodies are divided into a beauty half and a beast half, to which the lantern-like bait of the Remembrance correlates to the beauty half, while the dark tides correlates to the beast half. Taking into account all of these together, we can make a rough guess that the disappearance of Ouroboros midway through the swarm disaster probably had something to do with the rise of Fuli as an aeon at the tail end of the disaster to salvage all the memories of those who have perished inside Ouroboros' stomach. Which would go a long way to explain why Ouroboros swimming in the Red Sea was in the first Remembrance chapter in Swarm. Assuming that the Swarm chronology given to us by the simulated universe is true, we can roughly put together a timeline and propose some possible links between the Veracity, the Remembrance, the Enigmata, and the Nihility. Though, the disclaimer is that the version of history we got from the simulated universe for Swarm was also affected by the Enigmata, so standard Mythus disclaimer applies. Before the swarm disaster started, Ouroboros, who is possibly a scion of Permanence, or at least somewhat related to the Permanence, existed in the Red Sea. Like the long scions, Ouroboros had a moon, the beauty top half, and the lantern they used to bait the food, but they also have a dark tide half, which is the beast bottom half and affiliated with the Red Sea of Memories. Another key feature on the Veracity's design is the Heliobe heart, which, at this point, should be renamed the Leviathan heart. The Leviathan heart has had a statistically significant correlation to beings affiliated with Leviathans, ranging from the Heliobe, who are supposedly fragments of a dead Leviathan, the Heliobe-possessed people, Ouroboros, who is verified to be a Leviathan, and Cyrene, who is a piece of Fuli, the lantern-like bait of the Veracity. It's an incredibly distinctive design, and by now, with the release of the Remembrance MC, we know that it really is supposed to be a heart. For more information on the Heliobe heart design, you guys can check out this video from Lality for more details. Anyway, at an unknown time period, Polka built device AIX, which presumably led to the ascension of AIX as an aeon. Since HX is also affiliated to the Red Sea of Memories, as attested by Black Swan's testimony and Acheron's animation, we can assume that AIX was made out of a part of this Red Sea, paralleled in the animation by Black Swan's Remembrance being eaten by Acheron's Nihility. At the same time, the Red Sea of Memories is also affiliated with the Enigmata, assuming that the record is true and that the Enigmata predated the Swarm event. With 2 eons for the beast half and none for the beauty half, we can presume that the equilibrium took action to balance the scale back to the zero-sum state once more, which eventually triggered the Swarm disaster. In the first round of the Swarm disaster, the Enigmata, or the Elation, one of the two, spread a false prophecy, the equivalence of Era Novi. This false prophecy made the ankle guy, the origin of Feynman, believe that he could find the lost half of himself, probably his twin from the Beyond the Sky choir, in the Lepismat system. With the arrival of the ankle guy and the subsequent clash of his force with the bounty hunters, Tazi ascended out of love and loneliness as the archenemy and counterbalance to Ouroboros, presumably holding the beauty slot at the time to Ouroboros' beast half. However, midway through Swarm, Ouroboros disappeared for an unknown reason, and the remembrance arose as the new beauty half to replace the veracity, salvaging the memories of everything Ouroboros had eaten, which obviously included the bugs. However, Tazi was still around, so now we have double beauty, remembrance and Tazi, and double beast, Enigmata and Nihility, the scales still swinging widely from one side to another, an equilibrium in motion even as the arbitrators continue to manipulate things behind the scene for a zero-sum universe. Despite the remembrance's salvation, with the equilibrium between beast and beauty broken, the Red Sea of memories burst its bank, similar to how the River of Souls also burst its bank and broke the cycle of death and rebirth on Amphoreus. As a result, Lepismat was submerged in the Nihility's effect and overrun with Synthurstus, the equivalents of the black tide monsters in Amphoreus. The widespread Nihility effect eventually led to the clash of Ankle Guy with his Synthursta half and the subsequent rise of Nanook after the finale of the Swarm disaster. At the end of Swarm, Tazi was killed by Clippeth, and Aina sacrificed themselves for that. CP emerged, replacing the slot of both Aina and Tazi, so CP is also holding beauty slot in the current time frame. Then, at an unknown time, Fuli was fragmented into the seeds, which included Cyrene, March, and the pure child of the garden. At the game's finale, the balance count is still 2 beast for Nihility and Enigmata and 2 beauty for the remembrance and harmony, an equilibrium between the dark tide mouths of Ouroboros and the lantern-like baits of the same Leviathan. When the rose in the glass finally runs out of petals, when the clock strikes 12, the beauty will turn into the beast. But as the finality constantly reverts the hourglass, this process is reset every cycle, creating the world. Of course, if this balancing of the scale between the beauty and the beast is true, then we have our answer as to why Evernight's design bears striking similarities to that of Acheron and the Ouroboros. Both the Nihility and the Enigmata represent the dark tide and the mouths, as one half of the Ouroboros that encircles the world, in opposition to the beauty in the center of the tarot card, the moon underneath the water. In Amphoreus, if Cyrene is the simulation for Fuli, as the ideal beauty of the past in the Romanticism movement, then opposing her is Evernight, the rose-tinted glass, distorting the past in the hope of making it ideal and beautiful forever. But of course, this comes at the cost of hiding away the present and rejecting the future as well. In the 3.6 main quest, when Evernight's power took effect on Unhung, the dawn fog that appeared was titled as the Water Moon, as a nod to the Chinese idiom of flowers in the mirror, moon in the water, denoting that something is not real, an illusion, not too different from how the Moon Tarot card is interpreted in the West. With the obvious parallel between Evernight and Danfeng, the imagery of the water moon not only applies to Banfeng but also to Evernight as well, as an agent of the Enigmata, the jellyfish swimming in the dark tides, propping up the illusion of a human ego within the dream of the Penrose staircase. Interestingly, in Chinese Buddhism, Water Moon is also one of the titles of Guanyin, the inspiration behind Tribi and Ae in Amphoreus and Inazuma respectively. Historically, the moon is interpreted as a metaphor for Sunyata, or the void, the truth of the universe, veiled from mortal eyes by the water, the illusionary samsara. To see through the water is to reach the void and achieve enlightenment, to wake up from the mortal world. Thus, if March is the illusion of human ego, then the enigmata of Evernight is that exact water hiding the moon. To make the divine revelations of the mythos even more mysterious, the history fictionologists whipped up something known as mythos knots that contain a blend of rumors, secrets, legends, and myths. Historians would then blend such misinformation into what was supposed to be certain and rigid historical facts, with the aim to bring about a future of uncertainty for the universe. According to the history fictionologists, the course of history is limited by the narrative drive in the minds of its observers. If something can be done to mix myths into facts, the universe will be covered in the mist of uncertainty, allowing it to escape the calamity that is doomed to happen. Of course, like Evernight's action in Amphoreus, while her sweet dream means well, it is still very much a lie that would lead to said calamity Mythus proclaimed they wanted to avert. In this sense, you can argue that Evernight and the Enigmata as a whole are the Kama Mara of March and the Origin as the Buddha of the universe. If the temptation of Mara succeeds, then the Buddha will never achieve enlightenment and will never wake up from the illusionary samsara. Unable to deny their individual ego for the sake of the true human ego, the Buddha March would not be able to become the future Origin. Consequently, with no Origin as the Buddha to guide people to the Pure Land in the next cycle, the reset of the finality would have no blueprint nor seed, and no new life will be born, leading to the destruction scenario of annihilation. And this is why Evernight and all Mythus affiliations are unreliable narrators. Despite accusing the pure child of the garden to be on the same side of Nanook, her own action would also lead to Nanook's destruction. If the remembrance is a dwindling candle, a false pure land without a Buddha to guide people toward the true moon of human ego, then the enigmata is the desire for oblivion, closing one's eyes in the burning house because they believe that as long as they don't see it, the house will stop burning. What Evernight represents is distorted memories of the past, trying to avert the predestined future past with lies, but inadvertently leading to the exact calamity they wanted to avoid anyway. In plain terms, Evernight is a very peak Kama Mara reference and the Moon Tarot card rolled in one. After all, the Enigmata is only the reflection of the moon obscuring people from reaching the real moon of Sunyata, the void moon of the Origin. In Genshin, void moon is also the Chinese name for the Welkin moon, presumably correlating to the new moon and the sustainer. At this point, it's pretty clear that the goal of the game in Honkai Star Rail and Genshin is identical to that of Honkai 2, Moon Arc, and Mars. The plot is basically a reenactment of Asimov's The End of the Eternity, and we need to traverse across time and space as the technician to find Noise Lambent, the eternal feminine hidden behind a time block. In Honkai 2, the Era Zero Kiana was turned into Alea to maintain the collective consciousness of every soul through Project Stigmata, as the original plot for Honkai 3 Kevin's Project Stigma, Amphoreus Feynman's Eternal Recurrences, and the Remembrance's False Pure Land, the Arc project supported by the Pure Child of the Garden. To save everyone's soul from the effect of the will of Honkai and to cut the threads of fate enforcing the samsara, current Era Kiana had to shatter her soul into many pieces across roughly 46 trillion eternal returns, which put her into the same position as Alicia, Kevin, Fuli, Nanook, Cyrene, and Feynman. Hence, why in a previous video, I have argued that Alicia and Kevin are actually two split spies of Honkai 2 Kiana, and why Cyrene, March, Fuli, Nanook, and Feynman storylines also overlap significantly in Star Rail. It's because they're all fundamentally Kiana spies, and Hoyo only knows how to write one story. Like Raiden May's search for Alicia in Honkai 3, and like the technician's search for Noise Lambent in Asimov's story, the Raiden May of Honkai 2 also had to traverse across time and the soul world to find all the pieces of Kiana again before they could escape from the eternal samsara and ascend as the proverbial Sophia and Jesus. In Honkai 3, for Elysian Realm and Moon Arc, the technician is split between Vil V and May, who traveled a long journey to the past so that she could find Alicia again. The journey ended when May successfully inherited Alicia's authority and became the new Herrscher of Origin, reaching the void moon of enlightenment. In Mars, the role of the technician, the May of the story, fell to Layla and her own personal Reaver, with a direct citation to Asimov's story through an in-game lore book, The Myth of Elysium. Set up by herself to eternally search for Senedina, she must traverse across time and space inside the quantum computer to find Senedina again, the unfinished origin of Mars. So basically a copy and paste of Honkai 2. What did I say? Hoyo only knows how to write one story. In Genshin, following the same plot, Ai claimed that she was closest to the eternity of the heavenly principles. She is the closest to the pure child of the garden and Dr. May of Honkai 2, believing that she could reach eternity and achieve omniscient control of the world's destiny with her false pure land. Similarly, In the bigger samsara of Tevat, the traveler must traverse across space and time so that in the end, a new moon could rise out of the void moon, and Paimon could finally rewrite the repeating story of Tevat. In Amphoreus, like Layla, Honkai 2 Raiden-mei, Honkai 3 Raiden-mei, and Asimov's Technician, the trailblazer must traverse across time and space once again to gather the pieces of Cyrene once more, battling against the false promise of salvation by the remembrance in our way to find the complete Cyrene again. In the grander scale of the universe, we can expect the same plot for March and Cyrene's place in the story, and the purpose of the Trailblaze is presumably to collect all the pieces of March again to recreate the origin, the void moon, and the true ego hidden behind the water of the Enigmata and the Nihility. With the power of the origin, May and Kiana, May and Alicia, Layla and Senadina, all of them could shatter the shackles of fate and rewrite the meaning of the finale, so probably that is our plot here too as the Trailblaze, to find the origin again, to wake up from the sweet dreams written by the Enigmata's Kamamara, and to change the meaning of the finality, breaking free of the past recorded in the samsara that Evernight is so afraid of seeing. In a way, beyond Buddhist theology, you can also imagine the relationship between the Enigmata, the Remembrance, and the origin as a Feynman diagram of the universe. In quantum field theory, due to the uncertainty principle, which was directly referenced in the Mythus not description, the position and the momentum of a particle cannot be simultaneously known with exact precision. Hence, in de Broglie's hypothesis, a particle's properties can be expressed as a wave function, in which particle is wave, wave is particle, and the known universe can be visualized as a big wave, starting from the singularity at Big Bang and ending at the whatever ending of the universe. Hence, in Amphoreus, Cyrene is a ripple of this wave, representing a particle, or seed in this case, emanating from the origin of the universe at Big Bang. Representing how the wave function changes over time is the Schrodinger equation of the Schrodinger cat fame. And so Cyrene is Schrodinger's cat in the Amphoreus black box, both dead and alive because the probability of her existence has not been observed yet. So basically, until the box is open, the cat, or Cyrene the ripples of past reverie, is a wave function, oscillating between the probability of being alive and being dead in equal measure. However, when the box is finally opened, the wave function would collapse and the oscillation between two probabilities would no longer exist, as the observer would be able to determine which world line they are in across the multiple possible versions of history, the universe where the cat is alive, or the universe where the cat is dead. In other words, the universe has effectively split into two when we set up the experiment, one ending where the cat is alive, and the other where the cat is dead. Both of these descendant universes have equal probability to have happened. In the universe where the cat is alive, the observer would note that it is alive and collapse the wave function of the cat in that direction. But in the other universe where the cat is dead, the alternate universe version of ourselves would note that it is dead and collapse the wave function in the ending where the cat is dead. As has been argued by Hawking, this is the predestined history of the universe, in which all probabilities inside the light cone have already happened. It's just that we are still in the past, experiencing a recording or a memory in star rail terms of the predestined universe. In other words, in the context of Honkai star rail, the light cones of the remembrance are the ways they can restrict the past and the future of the universe in accordance to a predetermined end, albeit one with a minor margin of error within the light cones themselves. In effect, the remembrance records what is inside the light cone, the possibilities that did happen in the observer's experience, the proper history transmitted through written records, and the enigmata represents the elsewhere beyond the light cone, the probability that did not happen in the observer's experience, the myths transmitted through oral tradition. And obviously, the observer, the one who could open the cat box and determine the outcome of the world lines, is the trailblaze, the audience's avatar. Of course, written records can lie, and as long as the observer's experience is guided by the remembrance's history, which version of history that comes true is entirely determined by the remembrance, even if the path under the lamplight of the hermit might not necessarily lead us back to the true moon. After all, the remembrance is still a bait of the Ouroboros, and it is not only the dark water of the enigmata that can lead us away from the resurrection of the origin. To bypass this complication of proper history and alternate history, and what's not, We can utilize the visualization of the universe as a Feynman diagram here. With the path integral formulation, the Feynman diagram expresses all the possible paths that a particle can take from point A to point B and sum them all up together. This method is called sum over histories, in which the probability that point A can move to point B can be calculated with the beginning and the end, or in this case, the origin and the finality. Applying the same method to the star rail universe itself, which is evidently what the writers have done here for our romantic sci-fi, we can arrive at the conclusion that the origin represents the Big Bang, whereas the finality represents the predestined ending of the universe as a bigger version of Feynman's and Kiana's eternal recurrence, while the Remembrance and the Enigmata are the multiple histories that we are supposed to sum up to find the answer in accordance to the sum over histories method. At the origin, everything in the universe was stacked into a single point, the super-dense first singularity. Obviously, in Hoyoverse, the writers have connected this origin to the Buddhist true ego, the Taoist concept of void, the Gnostic Sophia, and the moon. In the origin, all four fundamental forces of the universe, gravity, electromagnetic, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force, were a single force called grand unified force. Discovering the formula for the grand unified force is the goal of physicists and mathematicians, and this is also the goal of multiple characters in Honkai Star Rail, as I have explained in the equilibrium video. However, the second law of thermodynamic being what it is, the origin underwent spontaneous symmetry break, undergoing phase change, and creating the space-time foam. This event is called the Big Bang. In Honkai 3, this event of symmetry break was associated with, naturally, the Herrscher of origin. The origin is, of course, the creation of something from nothing. It is at this point that the four fundamental forces started to split, and matters were created. Under the viewpoint of the equilibrium and the vacuum state, you would think that the number of particles and antiparticles created would be equal to each other. In that zero-sum universe, all the newly created particles and antiparticles would cancel each other out in a creation-annihilation reaction, resulting in a void. This zero-sum universe is the stated goal of the arbitrators of the equilibrium in Honkai Star Rail, but obviously that was not the trajectory of our universe. In our universe, electroweak symmetry break happened, and the universe did not expand evenly, leaving bubbles and crinks in the space-time foam everywhere. Our observable universe is one of those bubbles, and in our observable universe, for every billion particle-antiparticle pairs, there was just one extra particle. From this one extra particle, it eventually cascaded to the current state of baryon asymmetry. As in, there are more particles than antiparticles, and we exist as matter instead of the void of the zero-sum universe. An effect of this uneven expansion is that in some places, the fabric of space-time got bundled up together. This phenomenon is called topological defect, or topological soliton, when it's visualized as a soliton, or a solitary wave in a crystalline lattice. Needless to say, a solitary wave is how Nous kept sending their beeping to the geniuses, and the crystalline structure mentioned is Fuli. In other words, Nous hates Fuli and wants to break them with symmetry break. Depending on the symmetry they break, you can have either a domain wall, a cosmic string, a monopole, or a texture. It's worth noting that domain walls and monopoles are not compatible with our observable universe. Maybe in a bubble that we can observe somewhere. However, in our universe, cosmic strings and textures are proposed to be the seeds that led to the formation of the large-scale structures we observe today, and could be at the origin of some of the dark matter of the universe. Hence, the textures of memories are also called the seeds of memories in Amphoreus, which is quite obviously a cosmic string, with full participation from both Nous, the solitary wave, and Fuli, the crystalline lattice. It is believed that topological defects contain information from the early universe, which evidently was reimagined as a simulation of the past universe by Hoyo writers. Of course, in other bubbles that we cannot observe, some actually are zero-sum universes, where everything is the void. These bubbles that we cannot observe are imagined as the dark tides under the Enigmata in Honkai Star Rail, the history that did not happen in our universe, whereas the black hole, represented by the Nihility, is the entrance to the path connecting these bubbles. This is the role that Acheron plays, as the seeker to this entrance to the underworld, reconnecting the physics referenced in the game to Buddhism, Taoism, and Nietzsche once more. An interesting thing to note with Acheron's backstory is that her homeworld, Izumo, is named after a historical province of Japan. Specifically, this province is considered to be where the entrance to the Japanese underworld lies, and where Inazumi was buried. This same underworld and the river flowing there are the namesake of Acheron in Chinese, Japanese, and English, but it also has another name, the Land of Origin, or the Land of the Root. In a way, you can interpret Izumo being swallowed by a black hole to be another variation of the Inazumi and Inazagi story, where Inazagi ran away from his wife, the dead and rotting Inazumi, and buried her with a boulder in a mountain cave at Izumo. This same story was also used for the background of Ai and Makoto in Genshin. Hence, why the boss fight of Ai happened in a cave in a mountain. Much like Ai in Genshin before the Inazuma main quest, and much like Inazagi after his wife died, Acheron is still attempting to search for her proverbial Izanami, believing that if she cuts down Aix, she could find her way back to her homeland, Izumo, and find her origin again in, you guess it, the Land of Origin. In Japan, historically, Buddhism, Taoism, and Shinto were frequently syncretized with each other to create the metaphysical basis for sword schools, and their goal is generally the same as that of Mahayana Buddhism and Taoism. They need to use their sword and reach the void. This is the same void as in the Buddhist Atman, the true ego, also known variously as the true pure land of the Buddha, Alayavijnana true wisdom. Hence, why multiple versions of Mei-type characters tend to have the goal of reaching for the void. Because the people she's based on generally had the goal of reaching for the void. For Acheron specifically, her kit and characterization are mostly inspired by Fate's version Miyamoto Musashi, who is one of the most renowned sword saints in Japanese history. For a bit of context, previously, before Acheron and her connection to Musashi, Hokushin Mei and Raiden Ai as characters already connected the Mei type to another sword style, the Hokushin Muso Ryu and its descendant, Hokushin Ito Ryu. The Muso part here is identical to characters used for Raiden Makoto and Raiden Ai Musuishin after the Inazuma Archon quest, the Dream of One Heart. As a sword style, both Hokushin styles focus on striking fast as lightning, reuniting the mind and the spirit together. Now, this sounds quite different from Pure Land Buddhism, usual interpretation of the Pure Land as an actual metaphysical place that people can get to after death, the explanation that I have in the first part of the video. This is because there is a schism between various Mahayana branches as for the interpretation of the void and the Pure Land. While one half of Mahayana believes that the Pure Land is an actual metaphysical place, the other half reinterprets the Pure Land as our physical world itself. To go with the analogy of the burning house, this other interpretation believes that the ascension stuff is a white lie, like the toys the father used to lure the kids from the burning house in the Lotus Sutra. The world we live in itself is already the Pure Land, just that we can't perceive it as such because our mind has not reached enlightenment yet. Thus, to arrive at the Pure Land, we must achieve the one mind, the true Atman, by enlightening ourselves so that the world we live in would become the Pure Land itself. In other words, it's the atheist version of Pure Land Buddhism mixed with a hefty dose of Zen. Incidentally, Makoto means truth, so Ai searching for Makoto in the Pure Land is basically her searching for the true ego of Atman. Historically, this line of thinking was very popular among military men in the Sinosphere, and for them, the state of one mind can be reached by reaching or cutting the void with their sword, which was the entire plot of Raiden Ai and Acheron and the life goal of Miyamoto Musashi. While Musou is written as dream after the Archon quest when Ai adopted Makoto's sense of eternity again, before the Archon quest, the Musou of Ai is actually no thought or no self, following the Buddhist denial of the self to reach the true ego. Similar to the Ai before the Archon quest, Acheron's technique also references this same concept. For cognitive flaws of humans, severe the self. Fundamentally, they're all references to Miyamoto Musashi's strike of non-thought in the Book of Water. To reach the true ego, naturally, you have to sever your individual ego and discard all cognitive flaws. In life, Musashi is known to have written a series of books called the Book of Five Rings, detailing his sword techniques and his philosophy, fire, earth, Wind, water, void. The last book is the Book of Void, the same void as Sunyata and denial of the self, teaching people how to reach the void in the atheistic Pure Land sense. But not only that, Acheron's ultimate, talent, and technique activation line are references to Musashi. Her talent, Red Leaf in Rain, upturn the one void, and her ultimate, the remnant of dream dyed in red, the single slash severs, are both taken from Musashi's red leaf cut in the Book of Water. Her technique activation line, Streams, the sword light of the past, is taken from the flowing water strike in the Book of Water. But that's not all. In Acheron drip marketing, she was advertised as fighting with her scabbard and not drawing her blade. This is also a reference to Miyamoto Musashi, who had a habit of not drawing his sword to piss off the opponents and pushing them to make mistakes in anger. He also had a habit of arriving late to battles on purpose to piss off his opponents, which translated to Acheron getting lost constantly. So basically, if Hokushin is very Hokushin, and Raiden AE is a mix of Hokushin and Musashi, then Acheron is very Musashi in her entire characterization and kit. More specifically, the Fate version of Musashi, a Musashi who had not reached her zenith yet, a young Musashi who journeyed across space and time so that one day, she could finally cut down the void. Evidently, this is the exact same plot for Acheron and her search for the origin by, you guess it, cutting down the void. If Fate Musashi successfully cut down the void, then Acheron is an early stage of Musashi, still in her journey to kill God. As I have mentioned before, if the true human ego of Alicia is connected to both the Buddhist Atman and Schopenhauer's denial of will to live, then Acheron is a rejection of both, representing Fate Musashi's goal of cutting down the void and Nietzsche's will to power. Specifically, the void she wants to cut down is a god, and she is both a Musashi version of Hokushin Mei and the Nietzschean god-killer armor of Raiden Mei from Gun Girl Z. If Schopenhauer was a big fan of Buddhism, then Nietzsche was actually a big fan of Schopenhauer when he was young. But as he grew up, Nietzsche started to reject Schopenhauer's argument and basically called it self-defeating in not-so-nice words. An Übermensch, as Nietzsche argues, must embrace life, not deny life, and gain the will to lead the world away from nihilism, which is evidently Acheron's plot here, just that she is an Übermensch in training and not successful yet. This clash between Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, between the true ego and the atheistic interpretation of the void, is a key theme of Elysian Realm, depicted as the dance of ego between Alicia and May. As characters, they represent two different understandings of Atman, two different concepts of origin. In the end, Alicia denied herself her own individual ego, and Raiden May became the winning concept of origin. Basically, we can expect something similar for Acheron on her void-killing quest here. Once she has cut down AIX, we can reasonably expect Acheron to be on the reborn origin path from the non-existent corpse of the Nihility instead of staying in the path of literal nihilism forever. After all, you can't cross the same river twice, and to live is to flow onward. But what's interesting here is that we also have a mirror of this Nietzschean plot for May and Acheron and Amphoreus. Among the 3.6 achievement lists, the Scepter area has two important ones: Human, All Too Human, and Beyond Good and Evil, both of which are Nietzsche's book titles. In the main quest, the Scepter has evidently fallen in love with Cyrene and is developing an ego of its own, influenced by her true ego. In the main quest, it was revealed that the Trailblazer was definitely the memory donor for the Scepter, as it recognized us, and Cyrene was made out of our memories in the first place. So, in a way, it's not that surprising that the Scepter and us would be the 13th Titan collectively, occupying the same slot as both May and the Hersher of Corruption in the Elysian Realm. In effect, both of us are on this journey all this time to find the origin again, the true moon hidden beneath the dark tides of the Enigmata, mirroring Acheron's own quest outside of the simulation. In the end, the remembrance is the lamplight that could guide us to the moon, but the hermit as it stands does not know the path to the true Pure Land herself, losing her way in the analogy of the burning house. The Enigmata shows us the reflection of the moon in the water, but the path shown by the desire for oblivion in the darkness of the night can only lead to the towers of the destruction. It is when you are on a hero's journey, when you have successfully cut down the nihility to achieve the void, that you can see through and realize the illusion of human ego.